It is November 1st, 2019. I'm Nikole Miller, and I'm interviewing Mr. Sean Shar at Vanguard Attorneys Law Firm. Thank you so much for sitting with me.
Of course, yeah.
So can you please just first state your full name and where you were born?
Sean Shaw. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and raised in Tallahassee, Florida, and now I live in Tampa, Florida.
Okay, and how did you get from Jacksonville to Tallahassee?
So I was born in Jacksonville, and my father got appointed to the First District Court of Appeal and then to the Florida Supreme Court. So that's why we moved from Jacksonville to Tallahassee. So I only lived in Jacksonville a few years, and my dad got appointed to the first DCA, I want to say in 1980, 79, or somewhere around there. So I was born in 78. So we moved to Tallahassee when I was very young, and I lived in Tallahassee until I went away to college and came back and worked as a lawyer a couple years after I went to college and law school away. And then I moved back to Tallahassee after I graduated law school in '03, and then I didn't move to Tampa until 2010. So that's kind of how I got from Jacksonville to Tallahassee.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about your father. I understand he was a figure in Florida.
Right. My dad was the first African-American Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. He was the first African-American, almost everything in Duval County and Jacksonville area, the first assistant state attorney, the first assistant public defender, the first integrated law firm. I mean, he represented Dr. King. When he came to St. Augustine, he was a civil rights person in Duval County, and then he moved up into the judicial stuff, and he was Chief Justice in 92 or something like that. And obviously, he's a big influence on me, and to this day, of course, the way I feel about the death penalty mostly is impacted by him. I'm fervently against it. I think it's racist. I think it's sexist. I think it's classist. I don't think it deters crime. I think it's just a whole bunch of stuff wrong with meting out the ultimate punishment in a criminal justice system that we all agree is flawed. So I don't understand how everyone's still cool with killing people based on stuff that we know is flawed. But and so he had, that was one of his major opinions. The opinion that got him a huge campaign that he had to run is he wrote the opinion that found that there was a right to privacy contained in the Florida Constitution, such that teenagers didn't have to ask their parents for permission to get an abortion. And he wrote that in the 90s. And so there was a huge campaign to try to oust him, and it was probably at the time the most well-financed challenge to a sitting Supreme Court justice in Florida history. And he survived it, of course, but he had to go around the state and campaign and do all that kind of stuff. But I tell people all the time, I didn't know, I knew he was on the Supreme Court, but it didn't register me that it was a big deal kind of until I went away to college. And maybe when I was in high school, I knew, but, growing up as a little boy, I didn't know. He was just my dad, and, we went to fish and play basketball. He'd come to my sports things. It didn't register until I got older, but then it registered. But it was interesting growing up like that. So I always wanted to be a lawyer. I did not want to be a judge. I wanted to be someone that got to make the law rather than follow it. And so I didn't think I was made to be a judge. I thought that I was someone that wanted to kind of write these laws and change unjust laws and do things from that point of view. So that's why I want to get into politics rather than be a judge. Everyone thinks I want to be a judge. Even now, I don't.
And what did your mom do?
My mom is from Guyana, South America, and so my parents met on the Jimmy Carter campaign, and she, I think, is a lot younger than my dad, but she is in Tallahassee now, so she was a homemaker when I was growing up in Tallahassee. She still lives in Tallahassee.
Okay. And what was your early schooling like?
I grew up in Tallahassee to those schools, and the side of town that we lived on was a side of town that was like country, but it's now where everyone lives in Tallahassee. So when we first got there, it was a dirt road, and there were no new schools around there, but every level that I went ended up being a new school except for high school. So I went to a brand new elementary school, then I went to a brand new middle school, and the high school was being built, but I left by the time it was getting built. So that was kind of weird. And when I was growing up, you have your friends that live around there, and I played basketball. I was a pretty good basketball player coming up, so a lot of my friendships were formed around basketball, and I played a lot of basketball, whether it was in camps or whether it was in leagues or whether it was for the schools. So that's kind of, and I was an outdoors kid. We had a really big yard, so I was always playing outside or fishing or doing stuff like that. So that was kind of how I grew up. But I grew up as an only child too, so we had some neighbors and friends around the neighborhoods that I would hang out with. But that's kind of how I grew up.
Were there black students or black kids in your neighborhood?
There were some. I clearly grew up more privileged, I think they would say. Probably I would say too. And so that was weird until I started getting good at basketball. I always tell people, like, once I was good at basketball, there's always something that's like everyone can connect on the level no matter what your other stuff going on is, and mine was basketball. So when I got good at basketball, it was like I was accepted and it was all good. But this brings up a point that's, really frustrating me because it still exists. Like, I was smart and I went to class and I didn't skip school, and my father was in my life. Therefore, I was acting white, right? And black people need to really get over this kind of self-hatred thing that we do, that we try to make achievement and make positive characteristics acting white. We really got to get over that kind of self-hatred. It still exists. Yeah. And so if you speak a certain way or grow up a certain way or carry yourself a certain way, you're acting white. When in fact, I'm using the Lord's English. I know how to conjugate my verbs, and I know how to run on sentences. That means I'm acting white. Right. We really got to get over that. Yeah. But that's a good question, Gil. I really had a problem fitting in because I was, like I said, I was smart, and my dad was who he was, and we were middle class, upper middle class. But once I got really good at basketball, it was all good.
And then you eventually got to undergrad, and where did you go for it?
So I went to Princeton University for undergrad, and I went there. I wish I had a better story, but it was the number one school in the country, and I don't have a better story. That's why I applied to all the Ivy League schools and all the military academies, and I got into all of them except for Harvard. I got waitlisted at Harvard. And so I had all the acceptance letters on my living room. I still remember this. And I was trying to figure out where I was going to go. And I did not visit Princeton before going. I visited Harvard. I knew I was going to go to an Ivy League school, probably. The military academies I applied to, but I knew I wanted to go to law school, which meant that that means I'd be in the military another 3 years. And plus, we had just entered into this the Gulf War stuff. Like, we hadn't had a conflict in a long time. But when I was deciding where to go, like, it was in my mind that we've got this conflict now, plus I want to be in law school, like, it's a little dicier than maybe I think. And so I ended up going to Princeton. And so first time I saw Princeton was when I stepped on campus as a freshman. And, it was culturally different because I'm from the South. North Florida, let me get this straight for the listeners, right? North Florida is the South. Orlando and below is not what people think the South is. That's like palm trees and glitz and glamour. But so when we tell people you're from Florida and you're from the dirty South, they're like, no, you're not. Just because you're thinking of Miami. North Florida and Panhandle is country and rural and just as you would imagine it. So it was a cultural shock. I hadn't been around that many smart people in my life ever. I was always the smartest person in my class. In Princeton, I was getting C's and B's. Like, everybody else is as smart as you are or better. And there were other black people that had very similar upbringings to me. Like, that was new to me too. Like, there are other people who had very successful parents and had grown up in the same kind of conflict that I just described to you. So it was really interesting. Plus, I'm away from, you're away from home. You're in college campuses. So if you want to get up, you do. If you don't want to get up, you don't. Ain't nobody making you do nothing. If you want to eat, Fruity Pebbles all day, every day, you can.
I love it.
College, it was just getting used to being responsible for your own stuff like everyone else was, but it was a great experience. I mean, I have friends to this day that I met in college. My college roommate actually lives in Tampa, so we hang out a lot. But I'm going to go back to my college reunions this year. Is my 20th. It'll be my 20th. Yeah, it'll be my 20th year reunion. So that'll be fun, and but it was a great experience. It was people always ask, like, how do you deal with that kind of whiteness, I guess, for lack of a better term? Well, as long as you understand you didn't sign up to go to Howard. It's like, you got to know where, like, I know I'm at Princeton. So you can't be mad because it doesn't have this and doesn't have that. Well, then you should have gone to, Hillman if you wanted to enjoy all that stuff. Like, you're at Princeton, so you need to understand, like, they can do better, and we pushed to do better. I was the head of the Black Men's Awareness Group at Princeton, and I pledged my fraternity at Princeton, and, you know, we did a lot of black stuff. But you got to understand, you're not at Howard or FAMU. You got to understand what kind of institution you're at. But I had a great time at it. I loved it. You know, it's one of those schools where the person teaching you wrote the book, is a Nobel Prize winner, and has office hours, and they have all these resources to do whatever you want. It was an amazing experience, and so I had a great time.
So you mentioned a few organizations that you were involved in, like your fraternity. Expand on that for me. How did you find Black community in a space that didn't look like you?
So we all gravitate to each other because there's not that many of us, right? So y'all gravitate to each other. And of course, I was familiar with Black Greek life because my dad was a member. He was an Alpha, though, which is a different one. But I always had a curiosity about Black Greek life, even though I didn't know much about it. I knew that I wanted to probably do something. And one of my best friends ended up being my dean, but he was an Omega, one of the guys that I met at Princeton. That's kind of how I gravitated to that. So you go to.
You are.
I'm an Omega. Yeah, I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, purple and gold. That one, if people don't know. But so I would go to parties and hang out with him a lot, and so that's how I gravitated to a fraternity that was different than my dad's, but it's still Greek, still Black Greek life.
Was your dad okay with that decision?
He was. He was okay with that.
He didn't give you a hard time.
He gave me a hard time when I got my brands. Okay. When he saw that I had brands, but he wasn't happy about that. But I didn't ask him. I didn't ask permission for that. I asked for forgiveness after I already had the brands. I knew better than to ask him for permission. I wanted an earring once, and he flipped out, so I knew the brands were going to be a problem.
Oh yes, I'm sure.
But you gravitate to each other, and what's fascinating at Princeton is almost everyone goes to private schools, including the Black people. And so what I found was that those of us who were Black and went to public school were like a minority within a minority, and we really hung out together because that was really rare. If you went to a public school and got to Princeton, you were Black. I didn't realize this until we got there. And so and I found that we were like regular, like I didn't go to Exeter. I didn't go to Sidwell Friends or one of these ridiculous, Andover, one of these ridiculous private schools. I just went to a public school in Tallahassee, and I could play basketball, and I got good test scores. And so I related much more to the other people that went to public school rather than kind of the people who had, like, I thought I grew up privileged. Well, I mean, I didn't summer in Martha's Vineyard. Yeah. And, there's a whole nother level. Yeah. And so I wasn't on that level. And so I just went to Princeton. So that is how, and those of us that went to public school ended up being the other Black Greek people that I was telling you about. So those of us that all hung out together that went to public schools, they became members of Kappa Alpha Psi or Delta Sigma Theta or Omega Psi Phi, and it was a very small knit, but we all got along very well because we kind of all had very similar upbringings. Like a Black person that went to Exeter and went to Princeton has a whole different experience than me, even though I grew up pretty privileged in Tallahassee, Florida. And so those nuances are very interesting, but I also was a member of an eating club, which is like the bougie thing at Princeton. So we have this thing at Princeton. It's called it's one street, and there's these mansions. It's bougie. Let me explain it. There's these mansions on every side of the street, and all these mansions represent an organization. And this is kind of the fraternities at Princeton. And so every house had its own name and its own personality. So I was a member of Tiger Inn. And Tiger Inn was kind of the one that was known for partying a lot and drinking a lot, unfortunately, or fortunately. So that was the one I was in, and so that gave me a whole another cool entree into a different culture of Princeton because I was a member of this eating club, which is hard to get into. Like you have to get asked to get into. You gotta. Well, you go to the interest meeting, and then you have to hope that they pick you to bicker is the process that they call it. And then they come and get you, and you have to do some things that I ain't gonna talk about on this thing. But you have to pledge is a strong word, but you got to do some stuff to get into it.
But it's called eating.
It's called an eating club, but
as if like you eat food.
Yeah, but it is. So that is where you eat your meals when you're a junior and a senior. Okay. But it's also where you go and party. So everyone in Princeton, when it's time, when people want to go out, everyone goes to the street, and every one of these houses throws a party. And some of the houses you could get in without having to know someone. Mine was like you had to know someone at the door and ask to get in, but everyone wanted to come to ours because we were the wild and crazy. Like it's that kind of deal. And some some parties were different than others, and
sounds like a fraternity.
it's kind of like a fraternity. Yeah, it is. It's very much like a fraternity robe, but it's co-ed. But that is, eating clubs are like fraternities on Princeton's campus.
And I assume they were majority white.
Majority white.
So would you often find yourself being the only black
Right.
person in that space? How was that?
It was probably me and maybe 3 or 4 others. It was fine. I got my fill because I was a member of Omega Psi Phi and I was a member of Tiger Inn, so it was fine. And,
The best of both.
Right. I got along fine in that dichotomy and that dynamic, and I was very comfortable in it. And that's one thing that we all have to do this as black people. I mean, I'm not telling anybody anything. No, there's the mask. I forget which book I get this from, but I want to say it's W.B. Du Bois, but there's the mask you have to wear, right? When you're in front of people that are not black, and when you're in a professional environment, and then there's how you act when you don't have to wear the mask. And so we all have to do that. It was just, at Princeton, it's a little bit more pronounced, but I had a great time, and I was a member of a lot of different organizations, and it was good.
Do you think that your upbringing allowed you to fit in better in a space where people didn't look like you?
I do, because I mean, when I was growing up, I was in the gifted classes and the AP classes, and these classes, there weren't many black people in those classes. I mean, I told you I had a harder time really fitting in among black people than I did white people, because I was around white people more than I was around black people, because all my classes were with them, and sports was the thing that allowed me to be comfortable around black people at the beginning. And so, but by the time I was in college, I was comfortable kind of being around everyone, and that wasn't really a concern anymore.
So then I assume that the transition to law school then was also easier.
Yeah, I mean, by then, it was fine. I didn't even really know, I didn't know where I wanted to go to law school. I applied to, I think, Columbia, Virginia, Duke, and Florida. But when I was coming up, there was a scholarship that doesn't exist anymore, and y'all gonna be mad when I tell you about it. Everything was paid for, plus a stipend. And it was pure merit based. And all you had to do was promise to practice law in Florida for 3 years, which I knew that I was gonna do anyway. So it made no sense for me to go to Duke or Columbia or one of these other schools and pay $30,000 where they were going to pay me to go to Florida, or as my dad laid out, what are you doing? And so what's interesting is he and federal Judge Mikkel, at the time, he was a judge.
Stephen Mikkel?
Yeah, Stephen.
Oh,
Stephen Mikkel, where I actually was an extern when I was in law school. I clerked in his office for a semester, but they found my apartment. So I didn't even know this. They're like, this is where you're going to live. We looked around. I was like, who's we? This is my dad. I was like, what are you talking about? They're like, me and Judge Mikkel. Thank you. So I ended up going to law school. It was fine, and that was kind of how I got in there. I thought Florida was the best law school in Florida. Still is. I mean, I can tell you this now. The people I've met in law school and the people that have, the University of Florida network here in Florida is amazing. And it never ceases to amaze me how many people how many people went to Florida and all that good stuff.
And what was the campus like at the University of Florida when you got there?
Well, I tell you what, all those new buildings that exist now weren't there, because I went to the campus. I think I drove by when I was there for a football game, and there's all these new courtrooms and stuff like that. None of that was there. Hey, man.
Yeah, so what was the campus like?
Yeah, it was, just the new buildings weren't there. And so there was the main building, and I lived at Point West Apartments, which is 34th Street.
Oh, they're still there.
Yeah, I know they are, because I drive by them, and they're just as raggedy now as they were then. And so that is where I lived, and I had this weird schedule in law school. I don't know how I did it, but I slept all day, and I would wake up and go to class. No, I would wake up and go to class, sleep right after class, and stay up all night. It was this really weird vampire schedule. I don't know why I got on it, but that is what I used to study and work out in the middle of the night, and it was really weird, but that's kind of what I ended up doing. So I moved into Point West and went to law school, and, law school was the same. At least I shouldn't say that because it's different for everybody. Law school was difficult only because it was different, right? They're teaching you how to analyze stuff, how to read stuff, and it's not that it is just hard. It's just that you've never done stuff in the way they're asking you to do it. So I've never analyzed a case and had to write an outline. I've just never done that. And so that transition was difficult, and Quite frankly, I had gone right out of college, and I wasn't probably as mature as I needed to be, and I was just kind of cramming for classes. I wasn't, applying myself in law school as I should have. I could say that now. But I was cramming and doing, the bare minimum I needed to get by in law school, unfortunately. But it was a great time.
Do you remember how many Black students were in your class?
I do not. I know there was not that many. I also know that Dean Kenneth Nunn, is he still there?
Not as a dean. I don't think he's a professor.
Well, I think that he had just been given up the dean issue, and there was a problem around that when we got there. And it was race-based.
Of course.
And so I know that existed there. And quite frankly, I wasn't that involved in Balsa when I was in law school. I didn't know that many people in law school until I started dating one of my colleagues who was in law school, and then I started going to stuff, and she made me do things and go to events and all that kind of stuff. I really didn't know that many people in there, but it was like it is. It's very similar to when I was in Princeton. Like, it's very tight knit. The Black students hung with each other. They had similar upbringings and similar experiences. And
similar to each other?
Similar to each other.
So did you feel like an outlier?
No, but I didn't go enough to really have a frame of reference. I'm not going to lie. I did not go to many Balsas things, and I think I went to one or two events.
Why do you think that was?
I just wasn't involved in anything in law school. Like, when people talk to me now and do all this political stuff and I'm all this, people are like, well, you weren't. It's literally like the opposite of what I was doing in high school. I just didn't, I went back home to Tallahassee a lot on the weekends. It was only a 2-hour drive from Gainesville to Tallahassee, so I went home a lot on the weekends. And I just wasn't drawn to be active in law school for whatever reason. So I just never really was that active in law school.
What does your core friend group look like?
There were a few people that I want to say there was like one or two people that I hung out with on a regular basis. For the most part, I was going home to Tallahassee most on the weekends.
You have a study group?
No, I did not.
Oh my goodness.
I did not have a study group. I would kind of get the outlines and plus I don't study like, even if I had a bunch of friends, I don't study good like that anyway. I'm not focused enough to do that.
Yeah.
Like, I need to, if I'm going to do it, I got to sit there and force myself to go through the uncomfortable process of doing it. I don't do well with kind of a group of us talking over a problem. It's just, maybe it's the only kid in me, right? But I had a few friends, but not that many in law school. I knew of some people. Clearly, one of the first jobs I ever got, one of my first political jobs, was a person that I knew in law school but didn't know really well. And he's like one of my best friends in the world now, but I knew him tangentially in law school. And he's a state representative from Pinellas, and he got elected when I got elected from Tampa. And he was the general counsel of the Department of Financial Services, and he got me my first job. And I guess we'll get to that point. But I knew, and there's some other people I knew tangentially in law school, and now they're politically, and we know each other. So people, but in terms of like really tight friends from law school, not that many.
So did you ever feel like one of the few Black people in the law school?
I did. I will tell you this experience, and this is different, and this is a funny story, right? So when I got to the law school, no one knew who my dad was. My dad was still on the bench, so he was still on the Supreme Court when I got to law school. And he graduated, when I graduated from law school is when he retired from the court. So when I got to law school, he was on the bench. And so no one knows that. No one knows that I'm there. And so his first trip on campus, he comes on campus, and of course he tells me, so he's walking with some other justices on the floor of the Supreme Court. I still remember this because it's funny. He was walking with some other justices and the dean and some other teachers, and I'm walking with him, and I think the dean or somebody looks at me, he's like, "Can we help you?" And my dad was like, "You don't know that my son goes here?" And everyone was like, "That's your son?" And everyone's like, "Why didn't you tell us that you went here?" I was like, "What do you mean, why didn't I tell you? Like, I'm a 1L. Like, what do you want me to do?" And my dad knew that I enjoyed my anonymous status, so he enjoyed busting it. He was like, "Yeah, this is my son. He goes there. He's a 1L. Like, you need to treat him right. Like, what do you guys don't know?" And he knew what he was doing. Like, and so then, like, my cover was blown. So, like, I kind of get called into the dean's office to kind of talk about how's school going, how's everything going, or anytime my dad's opinion is read, I guess whose case that's assigned to now. Everybody knows it. And like the students were like, what's it like? You know, you're reading. So everyone, students, teachers, everyone then knew who my father was. And of course that impacted my interactions with everybody then, because everyone knew that was Justice Shaw's son, went to law school.
Negative?
I wouldn't say it was negative. I would just say it was like I knew that everyone looked at me through that lens after that, which wasn't, it was fine. And I was, of course, I'd been his son all my life, so I'd been used to that. But it clearly, every conversation I had with anyone, that was somehow brought up tangentially, referred to, or something like that, particularly the teachers and the dean, which I thought was really funny. And that's why I didn't want them to know that I was going there, but my dad thought it was funny. So, but it wasn't really negative or positive. It was just everything was through that prism. So I don't think it impacted the decision that why I wasn't active in law school. I just wasn't active because I just wasn't.
Were there any race problems on the campus at the time that you were there?
We were still dealing with the Kenneth Nunn issue, which it's been a long time now. I forget the details of it, but I just remember there being an issue about Dean Nunn and why he was no longer the dean. And of course, the number of black professors was always a problem, because I wonder is it better now? I can't imagine that it is.
Well, what is better? I mean, we have a few, literally a couple probably.
I'm trying to think if I ever had a black professor my entire time at the University of Florida. At law school, I don't think I did.
Do you know about how many there were when you were there?
I want to say less than 5.
Might be somewhere around that now.
Yeah. I mean, that was a consistent problem.
Yeah.
And, now we at least know and we talk about what white privilege is. That's a recent phenomenon, that we're willing to talk about what white privilege is. At one time, is there racism or not? And that was the end of the conversation. Now we have a more nuanced approach, like, is there racism, yes or no? If you answer it in the no, there's still another question. So are we operating in the realm of white privilege? Which is a whole nother nuanced, additional conversation that we have now that was non-existent back then. So I feel like people didn't necessarily think anything racist was going on, but privilege didn't allow people to see there's no administration, there's no professors here that are black. That's a problem for us that are black students. But because people didn't think there was racism attached to it, I don't think it was a glaring problem for anybody but the black students. And that's what white privilege is, kind of. Like, you got to be able to look and see, wow, maybe that is a problem that we don't have any teachers in administration that look like a significant portion of our student body.
And I assume this tension remained until you graduated?
Yeah, I mean, we never got any more teachers. We never got any more. It just remained. And of course, law students are a little bit more aggressive than other kinds of students. So it's something that, you're going to fight. And I tell people there's nothing scarier than a 1L law student, because they know everything and haven't learned enough law to know that they don't know everything. So that tension remained for the whole time I was there, yeah.
Okay. And do you have any other experiences, stories, anything related to the law school that you want to share?
No, other than, studying for the bar, which was, as obnoxious as it is now and as scary as it was now. And my whole, so I told you I crammed. I didn't really internalize what I was being taught. Like, I crammed and did enough to pass the test, and then I crammed enough to pass the next test. So when I started studying for the bar, I realized I knew nothing. And that I didn't know a contract. I just learned enough to get by, and now I needed to know a little bit about everything. And it was a massive undertaking for me to study and pass the bar, because I didn't have the frame of reference that a lot of other people had. And again, my ego was such that, like, I felt like if I failed the bar, everyone in Florida was going to know it. And so I was like, okay. So I studied alone, and I took it much more serious than I took anything in law school. I treated it like a job. I did what I was supposed to do, unlike the rest of my law school experience. But we took it right here in Tampa, right up the streets where you take the bar exam. And it was very scary and very stressful, just like it always is for everybody. But I passed the bar, thank goodness. But I just remember my ego being like, you cannot fail the bar. Like, there is no alternative other than you passing the bar. So, like, you got to do whatever it takes to do it.
Did you take a class?
I took, was either Barbary or one of them. I took that class. And, but it's just so much. It's so much that it's not like other tests where you can learn everything. The bar is so much that you cannot learn everything, and that they're going to get you. It's just, do they get you at the right thing that you don't know and it messes you up? Like, they're going to get you on something. Like, they got me on real property. You got me. You win that. You're right. I don't know enough about it. Good job. Y'all win this one. But I really knew constitutional law well and criminal law well. Like, there's some I knew really well because they, you learn some things are easier to learn than others. But, like, real property, like, to this day, like, I don't know. An easement. Like, I don't want to know what an easement is. I don't know what an easement is. I have no need to know what an easement is. But the other stuff I did well enough to pass the bar. And it was, when the bar results were coming out, I wasn't sure. I didn't know. I mean, that's one of those tests, like, you don't come out of there being like, I aced it. I crushed it. You come out of that like, man, maybe I need to figure out something else besides being a lawyer. Like, it's a test like that. Like, it is not a test where you're like, and so we all were like, and the bar results came out, and so I was working at Ackerman Centerfit at the time. I was working at one of these law firms where if you didn't pass the bar, you knew you were going to lose your job. It wasn't like, oh, we'll keep you right. No, I was working at one of these big law firms where, and it was I'll tell you about why I chose there, but I knew that this was going to be a problem, but I passed luckily, and that was a good day. And what I will say about my law school career search, so I took one of these jobs that everyone thinks they want right out of law school, right? So I got a job as an associate at Ackerman Centerfit. I clerked there my first law school year, and then I clerked with Stephen Nikole, who's a federal judge, my second year, and then my third year. I studied for the bar, and then I was an associate at Ackerman Centerfit. And so I moved back to Tallahassee. I've got this job, one of the highest paying jobs you can get out of law school, and it's great, and I'm a lawyer, and and it was awful. And I hated it. And it made me question what I was doing with my life and why I did this. And I tell people all the time, don't take these jobs with these big law firms unless you're sure that's what you want to do. I just did it because I thought that's what you're supposed to do. You clerk at a law firm, you clerk for a judge, and then you go work at the law firm, and you work at the law firm who offers you the highest salary, and you go there, and that's what being a lawyer is. It's not. And so I worked there maybe 2.5 years, and I just hated it. It was billable hours, and
How did you get this job?
I clerked with Ackerman Centerfit.
No, who introduced you? Did you?
Welcome to Connections, right? So,
Networking?
one of the head of the appellate division at Ackerman at the time was Judge Hatchett. And Judge Hatchett was the first African-American on the Supreme Court, period. My dad was the first chief. Joe Hatchett was the first black person, period, and he was on then the federal appellate bench. And then he was working at Ackerman at this time, a good Omega man. And so kind of that's how I got the clerkship. And then once I clerked there, they invited me to come back as an associate. And I hated it. I was always getting called into the office like, this memo we don't like, or you're not working hard. And like, it was just really, I'd never felt like a failure in my life before like I felt when I was at this law firm. And I just couldn't figure out why I felt like this. Like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to be doing this. And it really wasn't until much more recent in my life that I understood why, like, I want to be representing people and not corporations. Like, and I realized, like, I was meant to be a trial lawyer this whole time and not a corporate lawyer. But I didn't know that at the time, and now I know why I wasn't good at it and why I hated it. But all I was doing was sitting in my office writing memos and how rich people can keep their money. And you're fighting with other associates to get work. Like, you know how this way it works in a big law firm, at least when I was coming up, the partners have all the work to dole out, and there's a whole bunch of associates who are looking for extra work so that they can bill insane amounts of hours so that they can show that they work harder than you. So if I bill 2,500 hours a year and you only bill 2,000, it means I'm working harder. They're going to make me a partner and not you. But how do I get that 2,500 hours of work? I got to go to a partner and be like, give me. So I'm fighting with other people to get, it was just a horrific employment experience. Like,
Seems like it would be hard to make friends.
I didn't like it. And it was in my hometown, so it was in Tallahassee where I was working, so I liked that. And I had these political aspirations in the back of my head, and I was involved in a whole bunch of like I was the chair of these community boards, and I was in a lot of organizations, but the law firm hated it because all they wanted you to do was bill hours all the time. And so they didn't care. Like, I was on the board of governors for the young lawyers of Florida. Like, I was on a lot of stuff, and really they were like, is that going to help you bill 20? And it started getting to the point where I was resenting it. And I kind of didn't care. It was getting to the point where I was like, whatever. And I knew when it got to that point, I was like, okay, I might be messing up a reputation here. I got to do something. So I went to a smaller law firm and took a pretty big pay cut for happiness, and it was worth it every day of the week. And it was a bunch of people who had left Ackerman and formed their own law firm. And so it was kind of perfect. It was people I'd worked and clerked for, and they were nice. And so I worked at that law firm, and I ran for office for the first time in Tallahassee, and I lost when I ran for office that time.
What did you run for?
I ran for the House of Representatives in Tallahassee, my hometown. Got smoked because I didn't know what I was doing.
How old were you?
Wow. I ran in 2008, so I would have been 30, I guess, around there.
How old were you when you started at the law firm?
I graduated law school in 2003. So I worked at Ackerman from 2003 to probably 2005. And then I worked at this other law firm from 2005 till 2008.
You have to be fairly young if you went straight through undergrad to law school.
Yeah, I was born in 78, so that means I was probably 30 in 2008, right? Yeah. I'm leaving it to you, right? To do it.
We are trying to be attorneys.
I go to law school, so I don't have to deal with numbers.
Okay.
I get it. I hire a CPA. You tell me. And so, I was 30. So I ran for that office and lost. But I tell people this all the time, too. You never know who's watching. And you just networking is the most important thing, employment-wise, you can do. There's no job I've ever, and this is just my experience, I've never gotten a job by writing a cover letter, having a resume, mailing it in to someone I don't know, hoping for a callback. I have never, ever in my life gotten any job like that. Every job I've ever gotten was networking or knowing someone that knew someone, and that's just my experience, but that's how it's been for me. So after I lose this house race, the guy from the University of Florida that I was telling you about that went there a semester after me called me and said, my boss would, I think she'd like to meet you. And at the time, her name was Alex Sink, and she was the chief financial officer of the state of Florida. She was the treasurer for the state of Florida. We have a governor and 3 cabinet members, and she was one of them. She was the only Democrat in the cabinet. Big surprise, I'm a Democrat. And so I met her, and we got along great. And then he called me and said, we'd like you to be the insurance consumer advocate for the state of Florida. And I was like, well, there's only one problem. I don't know anything about insurance. I've been telling you my career path, nothing insurance in there. And he was like, you'll figure it out. Okay. So I had these two. The very first job I ever had in my life was at an insurance agency. I was like a runner. I was making copies. I only did the job so I'd have enough money to buy a Nintendo and some Charles Barkley shoes. I remember this. But it was a really successful agency, and the people who were the principals in it, one was a former congressman and a former commissioner of insurance, and one was like a long-time insurance, like they were just big deals in the insurance industry. And I called them, and I said, look, I've been offered this job, guys. Should I take it? And they started laughing on the other end of the phone. They were like, who the hell offered you that? And I was like, well, the CFO, they were like, you ought to hang up the phone with us, take it before they realize what they're doing, and then call us back. And so I took the job.
Without knowing anything.
Took the job. Didn't know anything about insurance. And it was my first political thing. So it was a high-ranking job and it was a political job. It was my first management experience. I ran an office of like 10 people. I ran a state agency. I was now doing state budget stuff, and I was the insurance consumer advocate of the state of Florida, which meant I was the person responsible for standing up for the interest of insurance consumers throughout the state of Florida, which meant I was always going to be probably an adversary of the insurance company. And I absolutely loved that job. And it's kind of what made me start to realize what side of the equation I needed to be on when it comes to people over profits, which is the name of my C4, by the way. And so I got that job. My very first day on the job, State Farm informed the state of Florida that they're leaving, that they're pulling out of the state of Florida. And so that's really nerdy for most people. That's a huge insurance issue. And this is my first day on the job. Again, I don't know nothing. And so you have to put on this face like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, what's and? And so
Did you understand what they were talking about?
Generally, but I didn't know much. But I knew enough not to embarrass myself.
Okay.
And I knew enough to study. And I knew enough that, first of all, I knew that this was a really big opportunity. And I was the youngest person in the office that was high level. I was the only black person that was high level. And black people had kind of gone to bat to get me the job because she didn't have many black people working for her. And so they were
Miss
saying,
Sink? Was
Miss
a black
Sink,
woman?
she was not.
Oh, okay.
And the Black Caucus of Florida was saying, you need more black people in your administration, and voila, here I am. So that means they're watching me, like I'm the highest ranking black person. I knew this was a big deal.
The token they might
Right.
say.
And so I had to crush it. And so I read about insurance. I didn't do anything to get in trouble until I knew what I needed to know. And so everyone was coming to meet with me, and the job had been largely figurative before I held it. And the only instructions she gave to me is she was like, I want to see your name in the paper all the time standing up for insurance consumers. That's what I want you to be doing. And I was like, cool. So that meant I was traveling around the state of Florida. This is where I got good at giving speeches. People ask me, like, how'd you get good at talking in public? It was this job. And I hadn't been good at it before, but I started giving so many that, you give so many, you do something so many times, you eventually get good at it. So I was just traveling all throughout the state, giving speeches, and I kind of knew what I was talking about now, and I learned more and more, and I started doing these things, and she and I really hit it off, Miss Sink. We got very close, and that's kind of, I did that job for 2 years, and people started understanding that when I spoke, that I was speaking for her on insurance matters, and so I became important, and so everybody wants to come meet you and do this, and that's where I got to know a lot of people that formed the basis of my kind of political network, was a lot of that stuff. and of course, insurance companies didn't like me, and I was like, that's okay. You're not supposed to like me if I'm doing my job right. And so there's a lot of political learning I had to do that I had never really done, and political learning and just learning about insurance, learning about being in that kind of environment. Like all this stuff was new to me. I knew I wanted to get into politics, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what lobbyists did. I didn't know what that means when they're trying to convince you to do something. I didn't know what it meant to have a boss that everyone thought was going to be the next governor. Like, there was a whole bunch of stuff going on. And so those 2 years were really, I loved the job. It was super educational. And kind of everyone that needed to know kind of knew my name at that point, because I was doing something that no one else was doing and black people weren't doing. And it was cool. So I leave the job then because she's running for governor. So she decides to run for governor, and I leave the job to go work on her campaign. And so I was the person that actually was with her. This is how close we were. I was with her all the time. And so when I was the insurance consumer advocate, I also went with her whenever she did like African-American stuff and trial lawyer stuff. Trial lawyers, when I use that word, I mean plaintiff attorneys. So whenever she had events that involved them, I would go with her because of my job and because of my skin, like I was natural in those environments. So we got close, and I worked on the governor's race, and it was unsuccessful, but we're still very close. But after that, I now need a job. And so, of course, I've lived in Tallahassee all my life. Well, the biggest plaintiff insurance law firm in the state is a law firm called Merlin Law Group, and it's based in Tampa. And the head of the law firm is a guy named Chip Merlin, and he is someone I had interacted with on this job, the insurance consumer advocate. And he called me, and he said, what are you doing now? And I was like, well, I don't know. I'm looking for a job. And he was like, well, before you take anything, why don't you give me a chance to convince you to come work for me? And so I came down here. Actually, Dale's one of the people I interviewed with, which is funny. But I did a couple interviews, and it was clear that Chip and I got along. He was on the right side of the equation. It was the perfect job for me because I was representing insurance consumers, and that's who he represented. So I went to work at that law firm. And again, what in law school would have told you that I'd be doing insurance law? That I'd be like, it's weird how your career plays out. If you'd have told me, Sean, you're going to be an insurance expert when you're 40, I would have been like, what went wrong? God, ugh. But
have you come to enjoy the insurance part?
I love it. I know a lot about it, and I'm well regarded statewide. Because I'm known as the insurance guy that protects consumers, and I love it now. I just wouldn't have thought it back when I was in law school. I didn't take any insurance classes, and I wanted to be a criminal lawyer all my upbringing. And the only kind of law I haven't practiced in my career is criminal law. That's the one I thought I was going to do. It's weird how it works out.
And you don't think that you could ever get back there?
I could, but I'm doing what I want to do now, and I like being a trial lawyer. It's why I know that I didn't enjoy what I was doing before, because I like standing up to big corporations on behalf of regular, everyday people. It's what I like to do. And so it's clear when I was working on the side of the corporations why I didn't like it. I didn't know why I didn't like it, but now I know why, because I shouldn't have been representing them. So I went to work. I worked for CHIP a couple years, and I run for office, and I win. So in 2018, I was elected. No, I'm sorry, 2016, I was elected to be the member of the Florida House of Representatives from this area. So I do that, and I'm working, I'm practicing law, and everything's going great, and I like it. And then I start getting asked to run for Attorney General. And I had worked extremely hard to get elected to be a member of the Florida House of Representatives.
How was that?
It was interesting because I moved to Tampa in 2010, and I ran for office in 2006. And that's pretty quick. And so there's a lot of people who thought I was jumping the line. I was called a carpetbagger, and what are you? Carpetbagger, that's a Civil War Southern term, right? Okay. You wouldn't know from Michigan. No. That's funny. That's what they called people from the North who would come down to the South.
Oh. So I guess that's me.
Yeah, you're a carpetbagger. Welcome. Don't run for office down here. But I was accused of that, and I was accused of being bougie with a silver spoon in my mouth because of who my dad was, and it was just all this because I didn't know a lot of these people here in Tampa because I didn't grow up here. I just moved here in 2010, got really involved in the community. I worked for this law firm, and here I am running for 2006 for a pretty big job, and some people didn't take well to that.
The community or your colleagues?
So I ran for a primarily African-American seat, and so I represented kind of the urban core of Tampa, which kind of is where we are now, and then it goes into the black community. And it was more so the grassroots community. It was weird. I got along better with them than kind of the professional community. And I think I know why, because I didn't go to any of these. It became one of the lessons I learned in Tallahassee when I ran for office. I was on every board, went to all these professional meetings. I did all this stuff for a resume, and it meant nothing because I didn't have grassroots kind of buy-in. And I vowed, I ain't gonna make that, you got to learn from your mistakes, right? I vowed I'd never make that mistake again. So it was money and grassroots support that I didn't win. And so, okay, I figured out, so I don't need to be going to all these lawyer meetings and all these, ends of court and all this stuff. I just realized, I want to be elected to office. I got to go to where the voters are. And the voters aren't in the ends of court meetings. And the voters aren't in all these, volunteer bar association meetings. They are important, but I couldn't do everything with my time. So I spent a lot more time in homeowners association meetings or, anytime there was an event in the community, I was there, or so-and-so pastor anniversary. I was going to stuff like that, and I was not going to kind of groups of professional organizations. And I think that may have kind of engendered some, well, who he think he is? Or we ain't seen him, or where he be at? And it was a lot of that going on when I was running for office. And, it's always something when you run for office. You got to be thick-skinned. I'm trying to get better at that. We're not all where we need to be, but I'm working on it. Even now. But it was in the grassroots community, because I put so much time into it, we're much more receptive. And look, I was trying to do it for the right reason. I'm in politics. I want to make a difference, not because I want to do it for a title. And I think people inherently can sense where your heart is. We don't give voters enough credit. They can tell where you're at. They can pick up on it a mile away. And so I was honored to get elected. I won by 100 votes. It wasn't by much. And I ran against someone who was, been here 60 years and was a community activist and was one of these boards. She's the member. She's the one that replaced me after I left to run for Attorney General. But I won, and it's amazing what happens when you win. It's all good, right? I had no problem. I was with you from the beginning, brother. I had your back, brother. Oh my God! So no one voted against me, I guess. Yeah. And so, and I went to a lot of churches. That's a lot of churches. So I have really good relationships with the pastors here, because I didn't just go and ask for them to vote and help me. I go repeatedly. I go now, even I'm not running for anything, and I still kind of maintain those relationships. But so I win that, and I go to Tallahassee. We do very well. I pass some bills. Democrats don't ever do that. I did it my freshman year, and I was only there 2 years. I was only there in one term. But I'm a lawyer and I guess I can speak well and debate well. So this attorney general job's coming up and everyone's like, you ought to run for it. And I was like, I'm not running for attorney general. I just got here. Like, thanks guys. I appreciate it. And then it keeps, and then like big money people are asking me to do this. And I was like, I'm cool. Thanks, but I'm not. And
Why
then
do you think they wanted you to run?
Well, because I think people thought I'd be a good attorney general, and people get enamored sometimes with black people that can speak well. Let me just be perfectly honest with you, right? And so I think that's had something to do with it, and who my dad was, and there was legacy there, and people knew that was my dream job. Maybe not right then, but that's the job I thought was the best job in Florida elected government. And so I kept getting, and I told people I'm not doing it, and told my own political people I'm not doing it. And then we keep getting, months go by, and there's really no big name in the attorney general's race still. And everyone apparently is waiting on me to make a decision. I was like, I've told everybody I'm not doing this, but the further along we get, and we still don't have a candidate, now I start rethinking it. I was like, well, now it becomes clear if I get in, no one else is getting in. So now I'm thinking, so that means I'm going to be the nominee for Attorney General of the state of Florida if I want it. That's a pretty big deal. And, I'm thinking, what's the chance you'll win? 30, 40%? Okay. Okay. So I have to start doing the pros and cons. Like, I don't want to, this seat that I worked so hard to get, I feel like I'm letting my constituents down by leaving because I thought I was doing a great job. And I talked to some of my constituents, and they were like, it'd be what you're doing for us. Imagine if you were Attorney General, you could do so much more for us. I talked to some other people that I rely on for wisdom, and some people were kind of against it, but, a lot of people were like, look, man, you can always run for the House or do this, but, you're going to be the nominee. That doesn't happen all the time. And take the shot. Politics is about taking the shot when you got the shot. And so I took the shot.
You were the first.
I was the first African-American nominee, and I got more votes on primary day than I think anyone in the state of Florida, because I was the only one with really not much of a contested primary, so I got a lot of votes. I didn't win on general election day, but we did very well, and I appreciate it.
I'm a registered voter.
We can end this now. We're on a high note. I totally enjoyed running statewide, and I told you, I was the one that traveled around with Miss Sink when she was running for governor, so now it's like weird. I'm the one running statewide, and I've got my guy who is really my Sean, who's with me all the time, and we're going all around the state. This is where my campaign headquarters was, up here. This whole floor was my campaign, and, you're raising money, and you're traveling around, and it is a ton of work, and, that's why I'm taking a break from politics now, but...
You have a family?
I do not. I do not. That's another reason I did it. Like, I don't know when I'm ever going to have another time in my life where it's just, let's do it. And so, we ended up losing by, I think 4 or 5 points. I got closer than anyone's ever gotten. I raised more money than anyone's ever raised, and yada, yada, yada. We didn't win, but we ran a good race. And I think everyone gives us credit for running a good race, which means that I can run for something else. One of the other things I thought about is, as long as you run a good race, you're viable. Like, you can run for other stuff or do other things. And so, I started a C4 called People Over Profits, where I kind of do things that I want to do to help advance my belief that corporations are taking advantage of people. I work at this law firm. So one of the things I do some political consulting. So I do a lot of different things, stuff that I want to do. And, I'm not in elected office, which is, I told you, it's hard being elected sometimes. So I needed a break from running and being elected and all that stuff. And so I'm having a good time. And so I'll run for something when the time is right, at the right time, the right place. But, being a public servant is really difficult in this Twitter, Facebook, social media age, because people pick you apart even when you're doing the right thing. And I tell people that want to get into politics all the time, like, look, you need to be ready for everything you do to be thrown in your face, even when you don't have bad intentions. You still got to be willing to do good for people, even if they're yelling and screaming, saying you're trash. That's hard. I not often, but I'll give you an example. So I represented the black community, one of these very poor areas, and I was known as someone who was very, anti-business and because I'm a trial lawyer, but I just believe businesses take advantage of people sometimes. So I was known as someone that was going to yell and scream on behalf of people against businesses, and I was proud to have that mantle. I was the worst rated member of the Florida legislature for business when I was there, literally. Cool. I was good with that. Like, I wore that as a badge of honor because that meant I was the best person for people. So there comes a bill before me, and it's about AMSCOT. And AMSCOT are these payday lenders, and everyone knows who AMSCOT is. And the bill was to allow AMSCOT to do something to change the regulations for AMSCOT to continue to exist. And so when people came to testify, it was the usual people that I would be siding with I was against. And I was against them, and I was for AMSCOT, not because I love AMSCOT, not because I love payday lending and I'm for predatory lending. The people in my district are poor. They're too poor to go have a bank account. They're not going to be able to get a loan. They have no ability to have any kind of credit. And if you take away AMSCOT, what are these people going to do? They have no other alternative. Number two, if your tire goes flat the day before payday and there's no AMSCOT for you to go to, what are you going to do to get to work the next day? Nothing. And so what I said was, I don't like the fact that AMSCOT is where these people have to go to, but AMSCOT needs to be an option that they have. If I could give classes and tell people don't go to AMSCOT and do something else with your financial planning, I would do that. But today, I have to vote for this bill because there's no other alternatives that the people in my district have. And I got eviscerated because it was so against my public image that people didn't understand why I did it. And I explained it. I did my Facebook Live. I did all the talks, and I was on
You know how to do Facebook Live?
I did. Well, I did Facebook Live all the time when I was in Tallahassee so people knew what I was doing. Because, people talk about you when they don't know what you're doing, and you're way up in Tallahassee. So I did it a lot from the Capitol. But that was the one vote where I got killed. And I didn't mind it because I did it for the right reason. I didn't mind going into a hostile environment and explain that vote because I knew I could explain my vote. Now, it's when you start doing stuff that you can't explain that you start hiring for people who can't do it. If you called me and you wanted to yell at me about that, let's do it. I'm happy to come talk to you about it. By the time I walked out, everyone usually was like, we get it, we don't agree, but we understand. Yeah. And so it was, but people would then be like, well, you got a campaign donation from this person and you did this and we saw you had this, so you must be a sellout. And that's what I tell people. Even when you're trying to do the right thing, you got to do it just because it's the right thing, not because people are going to say thank you, not because people are going to say Representative so-and-so is doing a good job. They're not. A lot of them are going to yell and scream at you. And so politics is really hard. I don't have to tell anybody that. It's really hard these days to want to do good. And, it is what it is. But as long as you do what you believe is right, you can explain it to people. I never had a problem explaining my stuff because I had a reason for it. But when you start doing things you ain't supposed to be doing or doing stuff that you can't explain, that's when you get into deep water. So I love politics. It was my job to really, I always thought it would, all the opportunities I'd been given in my life, all the schooling that I had, all the things that who my father was and how I grew up allowed me access to, I got to bring to bear on behalf of my people when I got elected in 2000. That's how I felt about it. That's how strongly I took it. That's how much weight I had on my shoulders when I was realizing why I was voting. That I went to Princeton and I did all this stuff and I had all this knowledge and all this legal training and all this political acumen. I'd done all these things and I was now their representative. Well, damn it, I was going to be in an opportunity to use all of that on behalf of these people that didn't even know that I had all that, but I was going to be the best person they had and that they could rely on. That's how I did it, and that's how I took it. And I guess when I was there, the people liked me and loved me, and it's because I did that, and that's how I acted. And I was accessible. I was always out in the community. You have to be. Again, if you're not, they'll talk about you. But politics is hard. And I tell people now, I like being able to go to Publix and not get cussed out. I like not being elected. I'm still involved in politics, and I do things for other candidates, and I'll imagine I'll run for something at some time. But I need to take a little, step back and make some money, and it's hard to do politics and live your professional life at the same time. But it's hard, man. Politics is hard, and the law is hard, and combining the two can be very difficult to figure out how to do it because Sometimes you cannot combine the two. You got to make a decision. And I knew I didn't have to make a blatant decision, but I knew that politics is more important to me than being a lawyer. I knew I had a stronger calling to politics than I did to the law. And so when I'm making all these decisions in my life, I made them on that basis. Even though I always came back to the law and I still practice law and allows me to do it. But if politics coming right now and there's an opportunity I wanted to do, I would jump in a heartbeat. I'm not like, there's no, law I love, but it's just different. It's different for me than the politics stuff because I just feel like you can do so much to help people.
And you studied politics in undergrad, didn't you?
Right. But again, so don't you study law? You'll know. I didn't know that. I went to law school. I didn't know that until I started practicing law. It's the same. I read The Prince and Machiavelli. What does that have to do with being in the Florida legislature? Nothing. I studied political theory, but that job I got in 2008 as the insurance consumer advocate was really the job that started it all, and where I kind of figured out in my life what I wanted to do, and I figured out high-level politics, and I got connections. It was really that job that I can trace everything back to. And, I got that job out of nowhere because you never know who's watching. You never know who's looking. But, that's, I've had some amazing opportunities just being at the right place at the right time and who you know and what you do. But you still have to perform where you are. And if I hadn't done good in the opportunities I was given, I wouldn't be given other opportunities. So, I tell law students all the time, I think I already said it, don't go to the job that you think you're supposed to go. Go to the one that you want to go to. Because the money, I know it because you're a poor law student, we all were. And that money, man, it looks good. Man, I could do with that? I lived on frozen chicken for 3 years from Sam's or whatever. It was awful. And I can't tell you how many buffets. It was awful. Ice cream and frozen chicken. It was awful. All of us were poor at one time. But take the job that you're excited about, that you want to take, not the one that Greenberg Chord offered you because of a lot of money, or Holland Knight or Ackerman. If that's the job that excites you, take it. But don't be afraid to work at the public defender's office. Don't be afraid to go do an unpaid internship somewhere in D.C. at a policy think tank because it's unpaid. You think you can't. I'm not doing nothing unpaid. The money's going to be there. You need to get the experience while you can because you ain't going to do it now. I'm 40-some years old. I'm not going to work at an unpaid think tank. I'm not going to do that now. Maybe when I was right out of law school, I would have worked at the prosecutor's office or something like that. And so do stuff that you're excited about that you want to do because you're not going to do it once you've got other things in your life going on and other kind of bills and other kind of stuff going on with you. I wish a lot more people worked at the state attorney's office and the public defender's office out of law school because it's trial experience. I had 0 trial experience till I was a lawyer of 8 years.
Wow.
Because when you're working at these law firms,
right.
First of all, you ain't going to trial. Those are the partners and everybody else. And I didn't see any kind of inside of a courtroom. I didn't even go to a court proceeding.
Wow.
I was just writing memos. These people coming right out of public defender, they may not be, they're making 28 or 30. And so everyone's like, I can't take that job. That person is going to make more than you in 2 years because once they get the job, they've got courtroom experience, and guess who they're sending to court? You, meanwhile, the person that came right out of law school and got the good job, they're going to jump past you not long because they got the experience that you don't have. So sometimes it's worth it to take these jobs that you think don't pay a lot for the experience because the experience is super important.
I've heard before a lot of people say if you want the firm experience, then you should do it right out of law school because if you go into public interest, you kind of pigeonhole yourself and now you're stuck there. How do you feel about that? It seems you would agree.
No. No. All these are rules that who knows, man. They're not. Again, my own career path. Who knows? Who would have thought that this would have happened? It's all how you do it and how you make it. Just do good at where you're at, and you will then have opportunities to do stuff. That's the only thing. Do good even if you hate it. Do good where you're at, and then if you got to figure out something, figure out something. Don't be afraid to take a pay cut for happiness. That's another lesson. I sound like some old black grandfather now, but happiness is worth money. and you need to figure out how much money that is. But if you're making a whole bunch of money and you're not happy, you need to figure out what it takes for you to be happy. Life's too short for you to be doing something that you don't like. Now, I'm not saying, some people like working at the big law firm and billing hours. Some people really like that. Good. Crush it. Stay there. Do it. But for those of us that don't, and those of us that understand that this isn't for me, you need to figure out what is for you and what you can do and what would interest you, and how to get there is what people ask me a lot. Like, how do I get into politics? And that could mean, how do you get elected? It could mean, how do you get to be a lobbyist? It could mean, how do you get to writing bills and stuff? And I tell people all the time, work on a political campaign. That's the quickest way for you to get involved. And you ain't probably going to get paid. You're probably going to be knocking on doors or doing grunt work. But the person that worked for me, this is a good example, messaged me on Facebook. He was a senator at FAMU undergrad. And he messaged me and said, hey, I'd love to work on your campaign. I'm from Tampa. I'm in Tallahassee now, but I'm from Tampa. I know Tampa well. I think I could be an asset to you. I didn't know who he was. I met him. I was impressed with him. I hired him. He worked on my campaign. He then became my district aide. He then worked in my attorney general race. He's now in Tallahassee working for a state senator. He's going to be a lot and that's just from a message on Facebook.
Networking, you said.
Networking. But he had some pretty grunt. I mean, he was, knocking doors for me when I was running for office, like putting up, like he was doing grunt stuff. Now he's not, but everyone's got to go through that progression for the contacts and for the knowledge. Like he couldn't have gotten to where he is without putting up those signs and knowing the whole, like he is now one of the only black people who's worked, on a House race, on a statewide attorney general. He's now a really rare person because he worked with me this whole time. That's how you do this. And so sometimes you got to do things that you may think are beneath you, but they're not beneath you because you're learning, and it's the network. And politics is very much like that. To get into it, you got to do some grunt work. You can't just, hey, I'm a lawyer, what's up? You got to be working on someone's campaign, or because a lot of people believe, I want to be elected to office, I'm going to run for office. Well, you're probably going to get smoked like I did that first time in Tallahassee, because you don't know what you don't know. Like I had this great resume, and it looked really good on the hand thing that you hand to people. Like it looked amazing. I got smoked because I couldn't raise money. I didn't know how to run a campaign. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I look back on that campaign like, God, why did someone let me do that? But I did it like a lawyer's going to do it. I want to run for office, and here we go. You got to get your foot in the door, and you got to do some things in the community and do some grunt work and get your hands dirty. And some of those organizations aren't the ones that you think you need to be at. And once I kind of sat back and observed and figured out what I thought I needed to figure out, then I was able to be a lot more successful. But, I just always thought it was the best way for me to use the gifts I had for my people was politics. And that's how I've always viewed it.
So you ran for attorney general, and then once that was over, you had to find another job.
Right.
And you ended up.
Well, I was still working at Merlin after I worked at Merlin when I was in the House of Representatives, and I was working at Merlin through my attorney general race. So when the race was over, I came to some realizations, and one was that I wanted just something different. I was happy. One of the things I had to be okay with was, when I was deciding to run for attorney general, I knew that I had to be okay losing. Like, you got to be okay with that. And I've lost a race before, so I knew, like, how are you going to feel the day after if you lose? Are you going to be okay with that? Or are you going to look back and say, I wish I would have stayed in the House and I could still be elected, and I shouldn't have done this? And I had to look in the mirror and talk to my star player, like Cat Williams says, and figure out, was I okay with that? And I knew I was. So the day after, I lose, I'm at my house, and I actually feel great, right? And I've lost. It's okay because I ran a great race, and I did what I wanted to do. And I ran the race for the job of a lifetime, and I was the nominee. It was great. Wish I would have won, but I was okay with it. I was okay with the decision. And so I was in a much better place in my campaign. It was like my staff was upset, and they worked so hard. And I told everybody, guys, we ran the race we wanted to run, and
I got to run for the seat of a lifetime, and
It was close.
I was cool. I was fine. I was fine with it. And so the day I go to the Dominican Republic for a week or so to recuperate, and I come back, and I realize I love working with this law firm, but I don't want to be coming here 9 to 5, working as an insurance lawyer. That no longer appealed to me.
Why do you think that was?
I think because I'd been exposed to politics at an elected level and at a high statewide level, I knew there was other stuff I could be doing. And this law firm had been so good to me, and I'd been running for office and elected the whole time. I knew that I was like, this isn't fair to them either for me to keep, because I was never in court. I was at depots sometimes, and, I just was never in the office all the time because I was either elected or running for office, and it was great for the firm. It was great for us mutually, but it just wasn't fair to them. I knew if I still had politics on my mind. And so I decided, I started the C4 organization, and I knew that I needed to get that up and running. I had to fundraise for it, and so we could have operations and do everything. And I knew I wanted to work at a law firm, but I didn't want to be doing it or had to be here all the time. And so, Dale, this is his office, and this is where my headquarters were. So I kind of talked to him. I was like, you do personal injury, like, a lot of people in Tampa know me. And you got a need for some marketing. And we kind of put our heads together. And if you drive around Tampa, you'll see my face on some of these billboards. And I do a lot of marketing for the firm and community outreach. Vanguard. And so I do some of their community events. Yeah, I do some law as well. But, I do a lot of the public face of the firm stuff. And that's great. So I get to do that. I have the show has sponsored a radio the firm has sponsored a radio show at noon on Saturdays that I host. It's like a political radio show on Black radio here. It's called Vanguards of Democracy. So I host that every Saturday, and I get to do some politics. I do some political consulting, and I've got the C4. So I get to do a lot of different things, and I like that. Like, I'm not in an office all the time. Like, I travel somewhat for political stuff, and I'm the general counsel for the Broward legislative delegation. So I do some work there, and I got a lot of things going on, and so I love it. It gives me freedom, and I still get to be involved in politics. And I just knew that I didn't want to be sitting in an office 9 to 5 doing depositions. I just needed, once I was exposed to politics, I knew that I wanted to maintain that exposure, but I couldn't do that as a full-time lawyer. And I just had to figure out how to cobble together some money to allow me to not have to be that.
I'm glad you're happy now.
Yeah, fish and hang out and everything.
Well, you said that you didn't really, you get a lot of your experiences just from connections. How are those connections related at all to University of Florida?
Well, a lot of judges go to University of Florida. A lot of legislators have been to the University of Florida. A lot of people in decision making, just a lot of people have gone there. The first job I got, I told you, the general counsel for the department I worked under, he was a University of Florida graduate.
Do you think that connection came from him being a University of Florida graduate or just from other connections?
That was the main connection. I didn't know him outside of the University of Florida connection. I would have never known who he was. And then when, even when you meet someone that you know on another level, when you realize they went to the University of Florida as well, that's just a connection. And it's the Florida school where that connection is strongest, with all due respect to the other schools. Like, it's the one that has the most infiltration around the state, particularly the law school. Like, there's just a lot of judges, a lot of people that pick judges, a lot of politicians, a lot of people went to the University of Florida Law School, and you got to use that stuff when you're trying to, figure out what you're doing and where you're going to go and what your next move is. Again, I'll tell you, I've never gotten a job by mailing in a resume to a random email address and saying, I'd love to meet with you, blah, blah, blah. I just have never done that. It's always been, Sean, why don't you come in and talk to me? Or, when I got the job in 2010 at the law firm here, he went to the University of Florida for law school. But he kind of reached out to me and said, I see that Miss Sink lost her race. Why don't you come to Tampa and talk to me? I'd really like to talk to you about what's going on in the future. Like, that's how these things have happened for me, at least.
Were there any differences in your experience with the Black alum versus the rest of the alums?
It's a hard question for me to answer. None of my decision makers, to be honest, people that were giving me jobs were black. I mean, right? But there's a lot of people that are in the same boat as me that were contemporaries that have a lot of the same experiences I do in terms of how they got their first job right out of law school, or how they got the job that they're happy with now. Because usually it takes 2 or 3 jobs before you figure out that you're at the right place or the wrong place. Like the first job is not usually, I hate to bust everybody's bubble, you ain't gonna be at the first job for 20 years for the most part. You gotta, I don't like this, or let me do something, another opportunity, and then you finally get to where you're like, okay, this is what I like, and this is where I wanna try to move up and get promoted. And when you're at these jobs, like there's other people that are partners or decision makers at that job that may have gone to the University of Florida, and guess what? You got a connection now, and you got to use that connection, and that's how the game works. And a lot of my contemporaries have had that same experience and the same kind of, my first job sucks, my second job sucks. Okay, we're kind of somewhere where I want to be, and then now they're vice presidents and doing all kind of good stuff. But the University of Florida thing is it's just a big connect. When I go back to the football games, like you see everybody that is somebody in Florida government for the most part. And so my area is mostly politics, right? Someone else's area may be architecture. I don't know, and I'm sure the same applies. But when I go back to University of Florida, I see everybody in Florida politics because that's where I'm hanging out. You may see anyone that's anybody in the law. They're probably there too. In fact, I do see them at other tailgates. So you just got to network and do that. And it's really hard, as a law student, because they keep at least they did when I was there, they were pounding into you. You got to do these on-campus interviews, and like you got to be in the top 10%. And if you're not, you ain't gonna get no job. And the job you want is the job of these big law firms. If you don't do that, I don't know what I mean, okay, I get it. But that's played out. Listen, you need to do good in law school. I'm not saying that. You need to handle your business. But if the only successful job placement is working at one of these big law firms, and that's what law school's telling you, that's just not accurate. And that's what they were telling me when I was in law school. I don't know if that's still the message they tell you, that is what you need to be trying to do. There's all kinds of cool jobs in the area of law that you can be doing rather than being an associate at one of these law firms. You could be a lawyer at the ACLU, or a lawyer at Planned Parenthood, or you could be in some DC think tank, or there's just all kinds of cool stuff that you can be doing using your law degree besides working at one of these law firms. But it's really hard to find those opportunities because they're not trying to help you find it. If you're in the top 10%, they'll help you get a law firm job. But if you're not in the top 10%, which I was not, and I'll admit that, there ain't much for you. And there damn sure ain't much for you if you want to find one of these unconventional law jobs. But that's what, a lot of government jobs are kind of unconventional type jobs in these various departments that the state has or that the city or county may have. Those are cool first jobs to have to get your foot wet in politics somewhat. But there's a lot of opportunities out there other than what the law schools are pushing.
That's great. Well, you've given already a lot of advice, but if you had any specific advice tailored to the Black law students at University of Florida right now, what would you tell them?
I would, why are you in law school? That's the first thing you need to figure out. Because I don't think we all know why we're in law school. We're just there. And it's just the next step we took. And it was just the thing we were going to always do after undergrad. Why do you want to be a lawyer? Why are you in law school? And that's something you got to talk to yourself about. That's a you conversation. You need to figure out why you want to be a lawyer. Is it to help people? Is it to make money? Is it to handle the family business back home? It's a different answer for everybody. But when you get that answer, you're much better able to figure out how to approach your career path. Because if you've got one kind of answer as to why you're in law school, like I went to law school to help people, but my first job I took for the money. See how those things don't match? And that's why I wasn't happy. So your career path has to match why you're in law school. And once you figure out why you're in law school, then you can kind of help that and figure out that path. But it's more important for you to follow that path of why you're in law school than it is to make money, than it is to do anything. The money will come. And I know I sound like some privileged kind of guy that's had all these opportunities and I'm saying money's not important. No, trust me, money is very important, but it will come. Don't think that you've just got to jump at it right out. Like, it's going to be there. You just got to make sure your career path is doing the right thing. That's more important than you jumping at these first opportunities out of law school. Just got to make sure you're taking the right job for the right reason at the right time. And it's not just because the law school is telling you that this is the one you ought to be taking. And you've got to be independent enough and know yourself enough to be able to say, I don't want to take holiday night for 6 figures. I don't want that job. I'd rather take a job making 70 being a lawyer over here because it's going to be better for my career in the long term. That is a hard decision for anyone to make, much less a first-year law student. That's just hard, but you have to be brave enough to make that decision because it will pay you. You'll be paid back multiple times over if you make those right decisions out of law school. And sometimes that's the right decision, is to take less in the right place. Sometimes. Particularly as a black law student, I'd also say, they said this when I was growing up, when it was much harder to find one. Find a black mentor, someone that could shepherd you through whatever area that you want to go in, right? You want to be a criminal lawyer? Find a black mentor that's in criminal law. You're working at one of these law firms, find one of the black partners and go in, and I mean, do it quick, fast, and in a hurry. Don't be afraid. Don't be bashful. They know you need one. They know what you're doing. And most of them will be happy to do it. They didn't get there without, I had a mentor. There were no other black people at the second law firm, but the first one, Hatchett, was my mentor. And, I got to bounce things off of him. And there's still so few of us there that you need to have someone that can navigate you, that can help. And I'm not saying this person is going to have your back if you get in a fight with somebody. I'm saying this is someone to just give you advice on stuff, on whatever you might be comfortable. You're going to be more comfortable sharing stuff with that person and asking them advice than you might be with someone that's not black. That ain't anything but comfort. And don't be ashamed of that. You need to find a black mentor in these areas because might help you. They may be able to help you short circuit 2 years of professional fooling around, and they can get you a job that you might, and some of the, there are organizations. The National Bar is something that you should be getting involved in. That's the black lawyers nationally. That's a lot of connections, a lot of networking. Everyone goes to those. And, I know I poo-pooed some of the organizations, but you do need to go to some legal organization you need to go to. I had unfortunately filled my plate up with all of that to the exclusion of other stuff, so it left me vulnerable politically. But you need to be involved in a few of those legal, the National Bar Association or whatever town you're in. Like we have the Hillsborough County Bar Association. You need to be involved in 1 or 2 of those for networking purposes as well. But get you a mentor and get it fast, because it's really important to help you navigate some of this stuff.
Did you have a black mentor while in law school?
My dad.
Outside?
No, I thought I had the best one that I could have. Because everyone else was using them, so I get to use them. But he was very helpful. He was, and obviously, so I had the mentor at Ackerman. But my dad's, the reason I went to the University of Florida and I was comfortable going there is he essentially told me, look, if you're going to practice law in Florida, you don't need to go to Harvard or Yale or Columbia or one of these. You already went there for undergrad. You need to go to a Florida law school. Listen, I'm on the Supreme Court of Florida, and the only lawyers I see in front of me go to the University of Florida Law School. The only lawyers that are at the places I'm at, most of them went to the University. You need to be going to a law school in Florida. And that was some advice that proved out to be correct.
Right.
And I went to it. And then when I went to the other law firm, I found a black mentor. But, my dad was able to mentor me even when I was the insurance consumer advocate. Even though he wasn't in insurance or anything, he was still able to be a good mentor in that area. I have a mentor now, Senator Arthenia Joyner is one of my mentors. She's the longest practicing black woman attorney in the state of Florida. And she is a civil rights legend and hero. She She lives here in Tampa. She works at this law firm, actually. But, I mean, I bounce stuff off of her all the time. I mean, I have a mentor, and people probably would think I'm someone's mentor. Like, you still have to have someone to navigate, even to bounce things off and to talk to people about it. There does come a level where there's no more black people around sometimes. You still need to, we have issues that other people don't have. And you need to be able to bounce that off of other people who have similar experiences. I have friends of all colors and creeds and everything, but I know that there are certain black people that are going to have very similar experiences to mine, and so I'm going to ask them, how'd you handle this? What'd you do here? I got told this. Should I be mad? Should I be flipping out? Or should I be corporate and let it go? Or am I keeping it too? Like, you have those conversations with people you can't have with everybody else, and it's helpful.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. There's not anything else that you wanted to add? Then
I don't know. That was a lot. I was spewing.
it is appreciated.
Yeah, of course. No, that was a lot. Well,
thank you so much.
Of course.
This is an amazing experience for me. And I'm sure the rest of my Pulsar members will say thank you as well.
Of course.